So to close out, and we're going to spend about a half an hour to finish out this panel, I have a great, this session, I have a great panel of folks that I'm going to invite to the stage now that really represent a cross-section of folks that are doing this out in industry and companies that are powering it from a technology standpoint. So first I want to welcome to the stage Nikki Katz from Bank of America. Megan Danielson from Pinterest. Dave O'Flanagan from Boxever. Vince Lynch from IV.ai. And finally, Rob Topple from Intel. Please welcome them to the stage. All right, well, welcome everyone. Let's start off with something easy. Why don't you each introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about how you're integrating AI into your own organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll lead because I got the lucky seat, but I want one of those cool pink t-shirts. Nikki Katz, Bank of America. I lead the digital platforms and strategy team, which in English means that my team is responsible for delivering digital banking solutions for our 66 million small business and consumer clients. From an AI perspective, we've long had a high-tech, high-touch strategy at the bank. We have, over 4,000 financial centers, 16,000 ATMs, et cetera, and like I said, very active digital community. And so for us, AI is one tool in a large toolbox of how we want to create really cohesive conversations with our clients across whatever channel they choose to interact with us.
Great, thank you.
And I'm Megan Danielson from Pinterest. We did not plan our all-black outfits here today, but that worked out well. So I lead the technology and travel verticals at Pinterest, and what that means is I help technology and travel brands create more authentic connections with pinners, that's what we call our consumers, on the Pinterest platform. Pinterest, if you're not familiar, our mission is to bring people inspiration to create a life they love. And that's a pretty tall order. It's a big mission. My focus is on making sure that we enable those connections between brands and consumers on the platform through very personalized, very relevant, and very inspiring experiences. And we use AI in order to do that.
Great, thanks.
Hey guys, my name is Dave O'Flanagan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a technology company called Boxever. So we're a personalization platform that's used by kind of large enterprises that sell direct to consumer to help them or enable them to make every customer interaction smarter. And we mean smarter. We kind of mean that we mean two things. One, we help them connect the dots across all the different touch points that they interact with their customer on. So everything on the digital channels like web, mobile, and email, but also into the physical agent-assisted world in the contact center, in the branch, and doing some cool stuff in the plane as well for some of our airline customers. We do that for two reasons. Once we've been able to create that connected experience, we then enable them to use data and AI to work out what the right next best action is for the customer. And for our enterprise customers, that kind of boils down into two specific areas of focus. One is helping them to maximize revenue by creating tailored, relevant experiences, enabling the customer to buy more for them in the sales context, but also recognizing when the customer needs to be serviced effectively, engaged properly, understanding when's the right time to apologize when you lost their bag for an airline rather than trying to sell them the next product.
Hi, my name's Vince Lynch. I'm the CEO of IV.ai. So we're essentially a natural language processing platform. So we make sense of lots and lots of language when it's happening between very large companies or small, medium-sized companies and their customers. So some of the obvious use cases for us are customer service, automation, and analytics. So making sense of things when people are speaking through voice or social media or through chat or email. And then also natural language processing for social listening. So making sense of what's happening with social conversation, how it's changing over time, what's going on with narratives that are relevant to the verticals that we're working on and the problems we're trying to solve inside of our companies. So very, 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 very hard language problems is what we tend to focus on. And we do that for very large companies like Netflix and Facebook and Capital One and tech companies with lots and lots of engineers that use us as specialists, or less technical companies that are also huge in doing interesting things like Estee Lauder and Disney and Aeromexico.
My name is Rob Topol. I'm the head of strategy and ecosystem development in an advanced technologies group at Intel. And what we focus on primarily is new network technologies. We've done hundreds of trials on 5G the past couple of years. And what we started to look at is how the interaction loops of humans, machines with technology, that interaction loop is rapidly increasing the frequency. We're seeing more collaboration. We're seeing consumers become producers. So we've started to look a lot at the network design from how AI can both be a catalyst in the way we look at the architecture, but also the fact that most of the transport and delivery of the workloads being AI is fundamentally changing the way that networks operate. And so we spend quite a bit of work and time on AI influencing the architecture, as well as the use cases that would improve personalization, improve the ease of use for most of the ecosystem, our customer base, in being able to quickly scale AI.
Awesome, thank you. So Nikki and Megan, maybe let me start with you. I talk about delivering experience as being kind of fundamental to making AI successful. Can you each maybe talk about an interesting use case that you've been able to enact and deliver within your own organization and what made it successful?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, trust is at the basis of every relationship with our customers. When you're in banking, that is a critical piece. And so for us, when we think about trust, it's always about acting in the best interest of the customer, providing relevant and timely information. You use the word next best action, so always showing them the choice of the next best action. And that's really true. We launched a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago now, we launched Erica, which is our virtual AI assistant. And Erica has done really well. It's used by 9 million different customers. And one of my favorite use cases, just because I was helped by Erica in this way, was when Erica told me that my Netflix monthly bill had gone up. And I was one of those people who didn't read any of the emails that warned me of this, but it was nice to realize that had happened. And I think back to experiences I've had in financial services before as a customer, and all the data is there, but it's there in such a reactive way that if you don't ask the right question or look at the right transaction, the right data point, you just miss it. And really, we're in the business of trying to make financial lives better. And this is one way in which we can really easily do that, by providing that relevant and timely information and giving customers the choice of what to do with it.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I've found fascinating is the adoption of our visual search technology at Pinterest and also our Pinterest Lens technology. So for those who aren't familiar, within Pinterest, you can isolate a product within a pin. So for example, if you're looking at a pin of a living room, you can isolate the leather couch in that pin to be able to be served up similar products like that leather couch, so that you can get more information on it and maybe go and buy that couch. Same thing with fashion or any other categories. And we're seeing hundreds of millions of visual searches happen every single month. And we now have something like 2.5 billion objects identified in just the home and fashion categories that are allowing for these magical and experiences on the platform. And we're finding that this isn't just happening from a digital perspective. Out in the real world, we were mentioning that we liked, Nancy and I liked Nikki's shoes, and I could take out my phone and use the Pinterest app to take a picture of Nikki's shoes, and then find those shoes within Pinterest, if similar pins, so that I can find out where she got them and potentially buy them. And that is an inspiration. That is magic that's happening on Pinterest that we're working to develop more and more every day.
Megan, that's really interesting what you just talked about with personalization. And Dave, in your opening comments, you talked about the airline industry and talking about personalization in terms of knowing when to delight a customer and when to maybe apologize to a customer. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how you're using data specifically and connecting those experiences?
Yeah, I could give you a really good example, an ambitious example that we deployed to one of our customers, right? I think, and the interesting thing is it's not all about AI, right? So it's about people, it's about process, it's about having the data connected across the experience. But, we looked at a really gnarly problem in travel is anxiety when your bag is delayed or your bag goes missing, right? So when we looked at that and wanted to, the customer did some analysis to understand what was the issues across the customer journey, and the number one issue is it was completely and utterly disconnected and the customer wasn't empowered at every stage. So we looked at connecting the dots from a data perspective. So when just before the plane boarded, we understood that the bag didn't make the plane, so we were able to proactively notify that customer that their bag was an issue with their bag, and already they felt empowered, not ideal, but empowered. We also were able to notify the cabin crew attendant. They have intelligent devices now, and the cabin crew attendant was able to go up and talk to that customer and help them understand that there was an issue. If the customer's lifetime value is at a certain point, and potentially they could become a business class customer, there was an upgrade offered on the spot, and they were moved up the plane as the flight took off. So there's really, as they arrived, they have a chatbot interface. We were able to interact with that. We just notified that, and the customer was able to interact via chatbot. If they weren't comfortable, they could click and hop out and then go to the contact center, and the contact center agent had the context of the conversation right up to that point. Not an ideal situation, but at every point in the journey, the customer was empowered, and ultimately it was a reasonable experience given that the only thing you can do is help remediate the customer at every point. So I think it's interesting because in that scenario, many times the organization is trying to deal with it in a kind of an individual or isolated point of view or position, but the reality is they're only making things worse. So we've been really focused on connecting that digital experience to the physical experience, and for brands that we work with where there's a digital component and a people component, how can you use AI to bring those two things together and get more from your people, which kind of echoes a lot of the sentiment that the other speakers were talking about, and deliver a more ambitious customer experience. I think, and that's the really ambitious connected piece. And then we've got some really cool examples where, just by understanding who the customer is, what their propensity to buy is, where they are in their customer journey, we can maximize the revenue opportunity for the customer. And that's really about using AI in a very targeted way for a low-cost carrier like Ryanair. We work with one of the largest airlines in the world, and they're about maximizing revenue at every point. And so we see AI having many applications, but from our perspective, the organization needs to know why they're implementing it, how they're going to deploy it, and do it in a trustworthy, transparent way.
And when you talk about that, and you talk about customer expectations and connecting some of those experiences together, are you finding that experiences like what you just described are expectations of customers, or do you find that this is an opportunity to surprise and delight? Meaning, where's the bar right now in terms of what customers are expecting from experiences like this, or is there really an opportunity to really wow them?
I think there's always an opportunity to wow them, and I think all of the speakers here are tremendous brands. So I think from what we're seeing in the industry, we're looking to be part of kind of digital transformation initiatives in these really large organizations. But from our perspective, I think customers are used to using Uber in Europe. In the banking context, they're used to using Revolut and N26 and Monzo. So customers' expectations for what a digital experience is have just skyrocketed. And I think a lot of the more traditional organizations have been caught flat-footed. But the reality is, I think even though some of those brands that I just mentioned there, they're great brands when things are going right. When things are working well, it's a really nice digital experience. I can create a current account almost instantly with 2 clicks. But when something's going wrong, when there's an issue that they need to speak to somebody, or the digital experience is somehow broken, those brands haven't quite hit the mark in terms of Net Promoter Score and customer expectation. And I think that's where traditional organizations have the ability to, one, obviously raise their game from a digital experience perspective, but two, if they can connect the dots with the people, the great people they have on the ground, in the customer interactions, in the store, in the branch, in the contact center, there's this opportunity to create a tremendously differentiated experience that can not just compete with their competitors, but also defend against potential new entrants into their space.
Yeah, that's great. Vince, from your perspective, we talked a little bit about the personalization piece, and we also talked about kind of delighting the customer experience. But oftentimes we find that the customer gets frustrated when the AI or when the digital assistant doesn't automate the way that we want it to. And so much of that is machine learning and natural language processing. I know you have a lot of expertise in this space. Do you want to comment a little bit on how that plays into the experience?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of interesting. My partner, she has to sit around and listen to a lot of conversations at the dinner table about AI and where it's going. So she's really nice to all the AI assistants that she speaks to, because she thinks when they take over the world, she'll be the one that they don't kill, and she'll become like president of the universe or something. But and I think there's something to that in relation to the way that we think about the AI in the room, and when it gets things wrong, how bad that can be. There's a great example of a startup that I was advising, and they tried to use an off-the-shelf NLP program, and it was for a hotel, and the person went down to was talking to the AI and said, can we get a cot for our baby, a crib for our baby in the room? And then the AI responded with, oh, we don't allow dogs in the hotel. And so it's kind of like, when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong, and especially when it gets it out of context and becomes an insult. And I think that the thing that's really important to note there is that language understanding is really hard. All these things that everybody's talking about here today and the things that people are building they're really hard to do well. But when you focus on very specific challenges and you're solving against a very well understood problem, and then you're thinking about all the different edges that exist around that problem. So false positives and false negatives, and what happens when we get it wrong, how wrong will it really be? So we can make sure that we're building out these AI experiences where we're taking into account all the different ways that people think about problems. And a lot of that comes from the data, having clean data, having diverse teams thinking about the data that's coming in, making sure that you're training models with data that is relevant to the use case, and that you have separate data that is from that original data source for testing, that is there to see how well the models are performing, and all these kind of data science techniques that are really important for ensuring there's a really good foundation before you start building, and certainly before you plug it into the world.
Yeah, Rob, from your standpoint, how is Intel enabling not only data-driven experiences, but also leading with automation and delivering that to their end customer as well?
Yeah, we're both, both helping our customers through their own journey, but yet, our former CEO used to say, talk about eating our own dog food, and the way that we apply, the way that we build up those solutions and testing them in our own environment. And so, Vince and I were just talking before the session about just the rich environment, data-rich environment that China is for a variety of reasons. I was based there for several years, and as we worked with the local ecosystem, one recent partnership we've had a lot of success with is Toutiao, the media platform, 120 daily active users, 120 million daily active users. They've got screen time double the rate of Facebook and many other social media campaigns, and we worked with them specifically on the algorithms that essentially helped the increased accuracy of video recommendations and the way that people interact with the site, the personalization, the content. It's really led to, frankly, one of the fastest, monetization growth rates of any, company in the past couple of years. And it's been a great learning experience for Intel on how we set up essentially a basic framework of the compute models to support, extensive training, the accelerators, the other platforms that then take an inference model and allow these companies to quickly scale and try to remove a lot of the tough bottlenecks, the complicated ways of being able to harvest information out of their model. It's something Dave and I were talking about before as well, of how to do that. And so again, mainly around visual workloads, media workloads, and even how we've applied that now into our factories. Intel has, we've got, each of our factories is about a $10 billion asset. We're obviously interested in the efficiency and performance in those factories. We started to look at how we utilize the camera systems and use essentially visual inference models, optimization tools, to where we've been able to significantly reduce the manual inspection, visual inspection steps inside of the factories, and we've significantly increased the throughput out of those factories by doing that. And it really comes down to utilizing the AI frameworks in a way that it removes a lot of the research, the physical research, surveying tasks, to where you can move directly to model-based information that can go immediately to a decision instead of spending all that time in that physical research state. The same way we did the work for Toutiao, we do the same thing in the way that we can apply that directly into our fabrication plants.
You know, big data is a big topic. Data is a big topic. And Megan, for you in Pinterest, you use data all the time to make experiences that are hyper-personalized for your customers. How do you balance the use of that data to be able to deliver not only a great experience to your customers, but also your suppliers as well, and make sure that trust, as Nikki talked about in her opening, that you can establish trust while still delivering those hyper-personalized experiences?
Yeah, so I will say our CEO, Ben Silberman, is very big on making sure we fulfill the mission of our company, which is to bring inspiration to our users. And he'll go out and talk to pinners across the country to make sure we're building for what they want to experience on the platform, and that it is true to our mission. And the number one complaint we actually get, and maybe if you've used Pinterest, you've experienced this, is that people want to be able to buy what they find on the platform. They see something they like, they want to be able to take action on it and do something with it. And so because of that, because we've been hearing that from our pinners and Ben's been out there talking to them, there's a huge focus now on making the whole platform shoppable. And so we're getting better and better at that, but it's a big vision for us, but one that we know will continue to build that trust with our pinners. And we've moved away from other things that we know, we don't allow political ads on our platform, and that is because it doesn't align with our mission to bring inspiration, and we want to keep it a very positive platform. And so we just kind of make sure that we're always listening to what our pinners want.
That's awesome. Nikki, one of the things that we've touched on a lot is technology, and technology plays a huge role in delivering these experiences, but it's easy to get caught up in the technology and lose sight of the experience. So at Bank of America, how specifically have you kept the customer at the front of the experience and let the technology enable it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear everyone on the stage because we all have such a different perspective on it. And when you're delivering digital experiences, there's a lot of reasons and goals of what you're trying to achieve. And, in some cases, it's eyeballs, it's monetization. There's all kinds of things that we're all trying to accomplish. For us as a bank, it does kind of, you talked, Dave, about those moments where things go wrong, but wrong or right, in banking there's some very serious moments. These are serious, weighty topics, retirement, college savings, making ends meet, right, at the end of the month. Whatever it is, there's some very weighty topics that we deal with. And I liked, Nancy, what you said earlier, which was, in the ideal world, we would have 100 million service agents talking to 100 million customers. And I think that when we do our jobs right in digital, it feels like that. Every digital interaction feels like a friendly, intimate face, helping you accomplish what you're trying to do, especially around these really serious topics. And so the irony of that is that in a way it's actually about technology completely disappearing from the equation. It's about AI feeling just like human experiences and about digital feeling like an in-person interaction in a way. And so for us, that's what we look at. And when we tackle what our customer journeys need to be in our digital platforms, we don't ask questions like, how do we use this technology to solve a problem? We ask the question of, what is the number one friction point for our customers? What is the number one pain point? What are their personal life goals and priorities? And that's what we set out to answer. And sometimes the answer might be AI. Other times it might be a phone call. It may be all kinds of different answers. And if to really create that intimate experience with our customers, you have to be able to draw from a very broad toolbox to make sure the technology is the last thing on your mind and the experience is first and foremost.
Let's talk a little bit about that when it comes to customer trust. And I'm going to open this up to the entire panel. Our research says that an overwhelmingly majority of customers, when polled, believe that AI and the data used with AI might not be used to their benefit. It might be used to the company's benefit. And I'll start with you, Dave and Vince, a little bit on the technology provider side. How do you balance what is a perception that there's a lot of data out there? How is that data going to be ethically used when building experiences and establishing that trust with customers that are ultimately on the user end of the AI experience?
Yeah, I think AI for the consumer, people imagine Terminator and sentient beings and the end of the world and Skynet and all that stuff. So I think, that, and I think brands that we work with are very cognizant of the fact that that type of language out in the kind of the consumer world may be misinterpreted, But to kind of answer your question around the data piece, so we're a European company. We sell to companies globally. We sell on every continent, so we're very cognizant of the data legislation and data privacy challenges or acts that exist in all the different jurisdictions. But ultimately, GDPR, the data legislation in Europe is pretty simple if you peel it all back. They're just asking brands to be transparent about what they're doing with the data and being very upfront and honest to say, I'm gathering this data, this information about your transaction history or your browsing behavior or some other information, and I'm going to use it to better serve you in these number of ways. And if you can have that conversation with the customer in those simple terms without getting bogged down in cookies and consent and all that stuff, then you're at a point where you can build a trustworthy relationship with your customer. I think that's one side of it. I think the other piece on the data and the analytics piece, particularly in banking and more regulated industries, is around transparency of the decisions being taken. And I think that's something where a lot of people are talking about technology and deep learning and all these very sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence models, but ultimately a lot of those things aren't appropriate for a lot of contexts in a regulatory environment. And so understanding why a decision was made, both on the data that you've taken and inputted into the model and how the model came up with that, because a lot of, Vince talked about it and a number of other people talked about it as well. If you want to be able to build a model that recommends the right thing for the customer, you've got to make sure that you've got your data right, you haven't introduced any bias in that model, and like the T-Mobile team talked about the team bias, but there's data bias, and people introduce bias into models, racial, gender, all these things that have huge unintended consequences, because at the moment you can just go online, download some machine learning model open source by one of the big companies. You can pump some data in there and you can start getting recommendations. But if you don't have the people, the process, the KPIs, the business focus to understand how that model is performing and why you're doing it, you can end up in a pretty strange place. I don't know if you guys remember, there's an Orbitz example years ago, and Orbitz had this model where they were pricing products, the flights, slightly up and down based on customer behavior, and it was a very profitable business for them. But they built a model that was just understanding that certain types of customers paid more for their flights online, and it turned out that people on MacBooks with certain types of browser were much more likely to pay $5–10 more for flights. So the model just happily learned that and just started doing it. But very quickly, out in the wild west of the internet, people learned it. It became very obvious that on a MacBook, on this browser, people were getting charged more, and they got dragged over the coals for it. It's a very simple example, but those types of things happen, and you got to be really smart and careful about the types of experiences that you build.
Yeah, I mean, our research says that over 3/4 of customers will not do business with a company that they don't believe are going to use their data successfully. So, Vince, to you, specifically, how do, as you think about keeping data secure, but also recognizing that, displaying to customers that we're using data on their behalf and not necessarily for the benefit of the organization, how do you think companies should overcome that?
Yeah, I think the core piece is around transparency and being very honest about what you're doing with the customer's data, and if the customer is engaging with an AI, let them know they're engaging with an AI. Like, they get that now. They're used to maybe having an Alexa or Google Home or something. So kind of be very open and honest about that part of it. I wrote an article specifically about this in TechCrunch around ways of avoiding bias in machine learning. I think it's called 3 Ways of Avoiding Bias in Machine Learning. It's a very creative title. But I think the important thing is to kind of be very honest about your practices and the approach that you're taking and what you're doing, and sharing that out publicly with people as you're doing it. Because it was really actually wonderful to be on this set of talks today, because you have all these people that are building really interesting things that are all very eloquent as well in the way that they're communicating about it. I think investing in people like that can communicate about the specifics of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and specifically why you're doing it. So what is that actual use case in layman's terms, so that any person who is a potential customer or a current customer is able to understand exactly what's going on. And I think as long as that level set is there, then it feels very safe and secure and open. And then I think, down the road, what you can imagine happening is some way of opting in and out, like in the future. And I think that will, if that's relevant for the business model of the companies that are there, if that's really the customer sentiment in relation to AI, then I think naturally the market will make that part of the behavior where you'll be allowed to opt in and out.
Yeah, Megan, specifically for Pinterest, we've talked about the journey that you've been on with your pinners to build that trust, so that people are actually doing commerce now with Pinterest. Can you talk a little bit about how you built trust with your customers or your pinners over time in order to do that commerce?
Yeah. For that, I was gonna say this topic is very timely, because we had a problem where a lot of times people come onto Pinterest to plan a wedding, right? And so you're engaging with all this wedding content, and the machine's learning that that's the type of content you want. But at some point, you get married, or you don't. But you don't want to see tablescapes anymore or anything to prepare for the wedding. And so we were getting complaints that hey, this isn't working, right? And there does need to be that human element that says, I don't want to see that anymore. And so just recently we launched what's called the Home Feed Tuner, where you can go in and remove some interests that maybe our algorithms thought you were interested in, and fine-tune what you're going to see on the platform. And you can also actually go into specific individual pins and hide them and say, like, this is not relevant for me. And so there's this fine line between letting the machines do it and this human touch to really make the magic happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I asked Nancy this question earlier, which is, a lot of companies want to know where to start, or really where to start their journey. So maybe I'll start it with Rob at the end and kind of work our way back here. But, what's the one piece of advice that you would give for an organization as they begin their journey down the path of AI-based customer experiences?
Yeah, I think honestly, we don't want to see. At Intel, we essentially provide a lot of the plumbing, behind being able to build training inference models, being able to essentially utilize AI for improvement of life, for improvement of business. We want to see that scale happen as rapidly as possible. So we really want to put essentially hardware, software that provides easy interoperability to where the platforms easily work. We want people to focus more on how to extract value out of the data sets as quickly as possible. So the advice is to not spend time on building essentially your own capabilities, engines. You should look for the system integrators, the providers in the ecosystem that can get you the quickest access interpretation of your data models to then focus more on how you improve the customer experience. Frankly, because the rate of adoption, as I talked about earlier, the interaction loop of us and technology, whether it's our phone, things in our home, at the workplace, it's rapidly increasing. You have to focus more on essentially how those models are improving the experience. Don't focus so much on actually building something from scratch. There's enough experts in the ecosystem to go and do that and help you with your businesses.
Great. Vince?
So I think the first thing to do is type iv.ai into the internet. No, I'm just kidding. I think the first thing to do is start with the strategy of what you're trying to do. So what is the business problem that you're trying to fix? And then what is the data that's around that problem? So what is the different data that's touching that we have in-house already? Because I think one of the nice things about machine learning and AI is a lot of companies are finally realizing they're actually really interesting data companies. They have lots of data already themselves that they should start by looking at and peeling through to make sense of what's there. Once you align on the data you have in-house and the problem you're trying to solve, then think about external data that you can either buy in or that you can look at it and grow in different ways, pull in from social media, pull in from websites, tag and build yourself in supervised learning models. Thinking about different ways you can find more data for the problem and also for testing what you have versus what's happening externally. And then bringing in data scientists if they're not already in the pool. Ideally, they are at the beginning, and start testing and applying some different models with open source approaches in machine learning. A lot of this stuff is open source, and some of that initial traction you can get just by trying out things that are off the shelf, and then maybe trying in some things that you license or purchase as well, and seeing how they perform versus each other. I think really understanding that ecosystem, playing, getting into the weeds, I think is a really good place to start, and starting with one very specific problem you can attach a KPI to. This is something that we have here, and we want to do X with it.
Great. Dave?
Yeah, I think you should start small and iterate. If you're really starting from the start, you got to start with a problem, work out what's the best way to solve that problem, structure a team to go after it, and then start small and iterate. I would say if you're starting building a conversation interface internally, if you haven't started with some simple rules focused on a very specific problem, you're probably doing it wrong. I think the other piece is make sure you understand your measurement. I think so many people we've seen, or so many organizations we've seen, that you meet the head of e-commerce, the head of loyalty, they're, yeah, we're doing AI. The reality is they've got some startup's AI model, they've plugged it onto the website. They don't know if it's positively or negatively impacting the conversion on the website, right? They're happy that they're doing AI and they can tell their boss about it. I think I couldn't agree more with the T-Mobile team about what it takes to do AI. It should be products enabled by smarter stuff, and that smarter stuff could be basic analytics, a little bit smarter. Your first model should be some form of logistic regression. It shouldn't be a neural network to launch a rocket. And I think all of these things are really, really important. And I think as people learn, you need to learn, you need to build into it, you need to have clear measurement and clear KPIs, and then build trust within the organization to go build a business case to scale the team.
Awesome. Me?
Nothing that hasn't been said already. I would just say understand your customer behavior and really understand what problem you're trying to solve so you can remove that friction. I think the T-Mobile folks said it best, but it always starts with the customer challenge.
Don't go last is the answer, obviously, because I'm taking the good answers. I think the only thing I would add is that, I think you need to ask why you're doing it and what business you're actually in. So I think the answer for Vince versus for me, as far as our approach to AI, is going to be really different because we're in inherently different businesses. And once you know that, you can go to asking, yes, who's your customer? What is it they're asking of you? And that'll avoid some of the problems that our T-Mobile friends were talking about. Like, not all data is good data. Not volume doesn't always win. I think that if you know why you're in it and what you're trying to accomplish, then you can actually, measure success and have a direction.
Awesome. As we close out the panel, I'm going to ask one final question, which is if you could give a one-word answer about the future of AI and where you see AI going and experiences based in AI, what one word would you choose? And I'll give Nikki the benefit by going first this time.
Oh my gosh, I should have held my comment. One word. I would say I'm going to say empowering.
I'm going to say 2 words. Visual search.
I think efficiency.
Efficiency.
Increased knowledge, 2 words as well, generally.
I'm going to say happiness.
Happiness,
happy.
Satisfaction. Very good. Well, listen, thank you. This was a distinguished panel, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to spend with us today. I want to thank all of our speakers and presenters, and thank you, the audience, for participating in this discussion today. Thank you all.